Today we're going to be talking about line and pattern. First, let's start with line. So what is line? Line is a mark with length and direction. Line is also one of the elements of art. You can think of the elements of art like building blocks. We use the elements of art to create our artworks. There are many different types of line. For example, line can be horizontal, vertical, diagonal, straight, curved, thick, thin, and implied. First, let's look at horizontal lines. As you can see here, horizontal lines go from left to right. Vertical lines are lines that go up and down. Lastly, we have diagonal lines, lines that go in a diagonal. We also have straight lines, so all of our examples in the previous page were all straight lines. We can also have curved lines. If you remember our lesson on shapes, we have organic and geometric shapes. You can also apply this to lines. Straight lines are more geometric and curved lines are more organic. There are also different types of line thicknesses. You can have thick lines and thin lines. My favorite type of line is implied line. In this example, you can see that the line is not completely connected. There are small spaces in between the marks that create the line. This means that the line is implied. It's not totally solid, but you know that that's a line. You can do really cool things with implied line. For example, here you can see the shape of an S because of the way the lines are placed. Another type of implied lines are the lines that your mind creates when you look at an image. For example, here we can see that this is Pikachu, but there are no lines to show us the outline of the Pikachu. But because we know what Pikachu looks like, we automatically fill in those lines. Now we're going to create our own lines. Okay, so today we're going to learn how to use Google Drawings to create lines. So when you open Google Drawing, you're going to open your assignment called Line Creation. And you're going to go up here to where it says line, and you're going to select a line. We're going to start with the most basic line, which is a straight line. So you're just going to go across, and you can kind of see when your line clicks into place. The really cool thing about Google Drawings is you can change your line weight after. So right now it's set at 1. We can set it to 3 pixels, right? And we can just keep adding lines on top, and we can make them thinner or thicker, depending on what you want. When you're done, you'll see here that this line looks a little wonky, right? So you can switch to the cursor and select that line and just press delete, and that will remove your line, and you can draw a new one. So I'm going to draw a new line, and here's a trick you can use. After you click, press shift on your keyboard and go across, and that's going to keep your line nice and straight. I'm just going to change that. So you can keep doing that. So click, press shift, and your lines are going to be perfectly horizontal. Or if you want to make vertical lines, click, press shift, and your lines are going to go straight down. So you're just going to keep creating those different lines. So I'm just using the shift tool to help me out. And this is really just so you can get used to using Google Drawings. Next, we're going to go diagonal. So your diagonal lines can go like this. And you can also use the shift key here to help you make these perfect diagonals. So you can see kind of how it's clicking into place. So I can go diagonal whichever way I want. A diagonal vertical line, a little off center, a little more off center, a diagonal perfectly 45-degree line, right? It's up to you how you want your lines to look, but I just want you to create all these different examples. Obviously, our horizontal and vertical lines and diagonal lines were straight. So for our straight lines, we can just kind of do any kind of random straight line we want. Now to the fun part, we're going to create curved lines. So you're going to go up here to where it says curve. You're going to click and click. And wherever you click, that's where your curve is going to be. All right. So when you want to finish it, you just double click and you've created your line. So say I want to make like a semicircle line. So I'm just going to click, click, and you can see as I wiggle, it'll kind of create that kind of line. So if I didn't kind of like how this line turns out, I'm just going to end it and press delete. I'm going to try that again. So I'm just going to slowly kind of create this weird, super curvy line if I want. And you can see your lines can go over each other, right? But they'll always end up kind of curvy. So you won't get really sharp angles with this curve tool. So I kind of already showed you guys this one, but here you're going to do thick and thin lines. So for example, if I want to keep making curved lines, I can go like this, and I'm going to make a thick curved line. And I'm going to go back here and select this line, and I'm going to make it really, really thick. Like that is a thick line, right? And you can do that also with your straight lines, is to creating these thick straight lines. And then we're going to do thin lines. So you can just go back up here and make some nice thin lines. They can be curved if you want, or they can be straight. It doesn't really matter. So right now, I just kind of want you to play around with what you're doing. And our last one is implied line. So what I'm doing is, remember that S example you just saw in the video? I'm basically recreating that, but you can kind of see there's an implied line here, right? And you notice how there's like that little grid in the background, those little checkers? That's going to help you figure out what things are straight and what isn't. The other cool thing you can do is you can change your line. So say I have this curved line. So when I select that line, you'll notice here you can also do line dashes, right? So now this is creating an implied line. So there's different types of implied lines you can do by using these dashes. Okay. The last thing I want to show you is my favorite tool, which is the Scribble tool. And this is a fun one. So at the very bottom, you click Scribble. And basically what it does is wherever you drag your mouse, it's going to turn that line. So you can create really nice freehand shapes, and it kind of smooths it out for you. It might be tricky to get the hang of at the beginning, but it's really fun, and it's something that you can do if you want to create, especially for your curve lines. That's a really great tool. So we could just create any kind of curve we want, and it'll just kind of clean up that line for you. All right, so that's basically how you can use Google Drawings to create different types of line. So what I want you to do now is to go onto Google Classroom and open this line creation document and create some lines. Next, we're going to look at how we can use line to create pattern. So what is pattern? Pattern is a principle of design that refers to the regular arrangement of alternating or repeating elements. So that can be shapes, lines, or colors. What we're going to do next is practice making patterns using Google Drawings. I'm about to show you an example of how you can do that. So what you want to do first is go onto Google Classroom and open up the Google drawing that says Pattern Creation Practice. What you're going to do in the first space is create 4 different patterns using line. Here you can see that I'm using a diagonal line to create a diagonal line pattern. I decided to switch it up a little and include some implied lines. As you can see here, I'm switching the line to a dash to make the pattern more interesting. Next, I decided to go for a curved line pattern. Remember, pattern is based on repetition, so it doesn't actually matter what my lines look like as long as they're repeating. So what I did is I created a spiral curved line, and then slightly above that line, I created a second curved line to repeat that pattern. Next, I decided to create a vertical line pattern. And to make this one more interesting, I decided to change the line thicknesses. After creating the vertical line pattern, I noticed that it didn't look that interesting, so I decided to add horizontal lines to it to create a grid or plaid pattern. Finally, I decided to use the Scribble line tool to make my last pattern. Since I'd used curved lines and straight lines, I wanted something a little more free form. Remember, your pattern doesn't have to be perfectly uniform, so not everything has to line up perfectly as long as there's repetition. So here what I decided to do was use the Scribble line tool to create a wavy kind of triangular pattern in between the lines I had drawn. Alright, so next we're going to be creating patterns using both line and shape. So first what I did is I started with some basic horizontal lines, and then I decided to create some shape. I went up to the shape button at the top and clicked squares. Then I drew the square that I wanted by pressing Shift to create a perfect square. And I made sure that the square wasn't colored in because I just wanted the outline of the square, so I made the bucket tool transparent. And then after that, all I had to do was copy and paste every single square and repeat that pattern over and over again. So to copy and paste something, you can either right click and then click copy, or on your laptop, there's a shortcut where if you press Control and C at the same time, it'll copy, and Control V will paste it. You might notice that I have these blue and red lines. Those are just grid lines to help me kind of block everything in at the same spot. Next, I decided to create a curve pattern. So what I did is I created that curve, and then I created circle shapes instead. But this time, I wanted my circle shapes filled in. So I clicked the paint bucket tool and selected black to fill those in. At this point, I tried to recreate all the curves, but realized that I can just create one curve with all the dots, and then select that shape and duplicate it. So what you have to do is just go up to the cursor tool and just drag around the shapes you want to copy. It's going to select all those shapes and lines, and then just press Ctrl V like you did before, and it's going to repeat. For my third shape, I decided I wanted to create a hexagon or honeycomb shape. So what I did is I went and clicked some shapes and just created all those honeycombs. So at this point, I realized that Google Drawings isn't always the best because you can't always get your spacing to work out perfectly, and that's okay. So you can see the spaces aren't even in between my shapes, but I just have to live with that. After I finished all the shapes, I decided to add some lines to make it more interesting. And at this point, I realized that when you have a shape, you can kind of click in the corners. When you hover over it, it'll have these little purple dots, and you can click in and draw some lines across that way. So that's how I got all these perfect X's onto my hexagon. Lastly, I decided to do something a little funkier for my final pattern. I started by trying to use more shapes, but I didn't like how it turned out, so I deleted that. And what I did instead is created these little weird elbow connector lines, and I kind of like how that looks, so I created the lines first and decided to put some shapes inside those lines to fill it out and make it more interesting. So before we end the video, I just want to share one last tip with you guys. I actually didn't realize this until just now in the video, but you can actually zoom in on your work. So all you got to do is go up to the top toolbar, click View and Zoom, and you can choose how far in you want to zoom. This is so helpful because I was just staring at the screen and everything was tiny, but once everything's bigger, it's easier to get clean lines, match up your shapes and everything. So remember, View and Zoom. So really the whole point of this exercise is to get more comfortable using Google Drawings, especially using the line tools and the shape tools to create different patterns, which eventually we're going to be creating a full artwork out of. I just want you to have fun with this activity. There's no such thing as a wrong pattern. If things are repeating in your design, it's a pattern. Have a lot of fun with it, just get comfortable with the software, and I look forward to seeing all your different patterns.